Hello, Internet. Now, this video is going to be a difficult one because it's an incredibly complicated subject with so many moving parts to it, and I am not an expert on this subject. Just gonna lay my cards on the table about that. My desire with this video is to lay down the history over the past couple decades of this topic, to put what is currently happening in context, and then to separate that from me giving my opinion about what is occurring, and how I think the world should be in my ideal Timtopia. So now, laying the table. What is this about? It's about immigration in America, particularly illegal immigration coming up through the southern border from Mexico.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
So what's been going on? Well, let me tell you. Recently, images have come out from the Trump administration in America of them separating children from their parents and also putting the parents and other people coming across the border into cages. There has been a widespread perception that Trump is ripping children from their families as they come up through the border and try to enter not through a port of entry. And this has created a massive outrage from the left and from humanitarian organizations and representatives of immigrants, the works.
Now to Washington, D.C., where nearly 600 people, mainly women, were arrested on Capitol Hill. Among them, the actress and activist Susan Sarandon.
We must resist! Women all around! Women all around! Raise your fist!
According to The Guardian, 2,000 children separated from parents in 6 weeks under Trump policy. Almost 2,000 children have been separated from their families at the US southern border over a 6-week period during a crackdown on illegal entries, according to the Department of Homeland Security figures obtained on Friday by the Associated Press. The figures show that 1,995 minors were separated from 1,940 adults between 19 April and 31 May 2018. The separations were not broken down by age and included separations for illegal entry, immigration violations, or possible criminal conduct by the adult. Under a zero-tolerance policy announced by the Attorney General Jeff Sessions, Department of Homeland Security officials are now referring all cases of illegal entry for criminal prosecution. U.S. protocol prohibits detaining children with their parents because the children are not charged with a crime while the parents are. And based on this, the knowledge that the children have been torn apart from the families has created huge anger. So that's how the left has responded to this issue. Now, how has many on the right responded to this issue? I would say with a total lack of caring, like a lack of humanity. They want to downplay it. They really don't care, and they also want to deflect to say, oh, Obama also did these detentions, therefore look away from that, just ignore it, just let it continue. And some of the rhetoric in particular has been incredibly disgusting.
So since more illegal immigrants are rushing the border, more kids are being separated from their parents and temporarily housed in what are essentially summer camps, or as the San Diego Union Tribune described them today, as looking like basically boarding schools.
I read today about a 10-year-old girl with Down syndrome who was taken from her mother and put in a cage. I read about did you say want to a 10-year-old with Down syndrome being taken from her mother?
What I said is you can pick anything you want out, but the bottom line is very clear.
How dare you?
When you
How
cross
absolutely
the border
dare you,
illegally,
sir? I read about...
It looks awesome. That's not a prison. It looks like a fun place to hang. Look, you get pictures up on your wall. Anyway, everyone is lying to you about immigration and what these kids go through.
And how has the Trump administration responded to this? Well, firstly, there is the man at the top, Donald Trump. He has basically just said, Democrats, 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 Democrats.
Which has been going on for many years. We have come up with a lot of solutions, but we have Democrats that don't want to approve anything because that's probably, they think, bad for the election that's coming up. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people suffering, and that's unfortunate. In addition, Democrat and court-ordered loopholes prevent family detention and lead to family separation, no matter how you cut it. The Democrats are causing tremendous damage and destruction and lives by not doing something about this. Because they think immigration is being weak on the border, which is therefore allowing tremendous crime to come into our country. They think that that's a good issue for them. And I'll say it very honestly, and I'll say it very straight. Immigration is the fault in all of the problems that we're having, because we cannot get them to sign legislation. We cannot get them even to the negotiating table. And I say it's very strongly the Democrats' fault.
Because they won't allow us to reform the law to make it good and nice, we have to separate these children. Fucking Democrats, 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 Democrats. Jeff Sessions, who is Trump's Attorney General, has been an extreme hardliner on immigration for a long amount of time.
For those that continue to seek improper and illegal entry into this country, be forewarned. This is a new era. This is the Trump era. The lawlessness, the abdication of duty to enforce our laws, and the catch and release policies of the past are over. If you violate the law, you subject yourself to prosecution. And I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government, because God has ordained the government for his purposes. Orderly and lawful processes are good in themselves.
Who announced the zero tolerance policy from the Department of Justice website, dated Friday, April 6, 2018. Attorney General announces zero tolerance policy for criminal illegal entry. Attorney General Jeff Sessions today notified all U.S. attorneys' offices along the southwest border of a new zero tolerance policy for offenses under 8 U.S.C. Code 1325(a), which prohibits both attempted illegal entry and illegal entry into the United States by an alien. And then goes on to say that there was a big increase in illegal border crossings. Quick fact check. Quote, illegal crossing attempts at the US southwest border triple in March from a year ago. I wanted some context for that, so Newsweek has an article where they explain why. According to them, rates of people apprehended or turned away at the border in March 2017 were at their lowest in 2 decades and fell to levels at least 2 times lower than the 4 years prior. So there has been a large surge over the course of a year, but in the context of the wider trends, it's not clear whether that indicates anything in particular, and Obama also faced a surge. The 2014 American immigration crisis was a surge in unaccompanied children and women from the Northern Triangle of Central America seeking entrance to the United States in 2014, reaching extreme proportions that provoked a response from the US government in 2014 when tens of thousands of women and children from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras migrated to the United States. Many of the children had no parent, legal guardian available to provide care or physical custody and quickly overwhelmed local border patrols, so they created temporary shelters for families and children in response to the crisis. And I'll talk about that later in this video. And after announcing his zero tolerance policy and seeing the fruits of his efforts, this was how he responded to it.
Nazi Germany, concentration camps, human rights violations. Laura Bush has weighed in, Michelle Obama, Rosalind Carter, got all the first ladies going back to Eleanor Roosevelt. She's apparently weighed in as well. General Sessions, what's going on here?
Well, it's a real exaggeration. Of course, in Nazi Germany, they were keeping the Jews from leaving the country, but
setting that bar very low. Nazis did stuff slightly differently, so it's not a big deal, you see. And the White House press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, responded by not giving a fuck. Like, she didn't care at all about those children.
Where does it say in the Bible that it's moral to take children away from their mothers?
I'm not aware of the Attorney General's comments or what he would be referencing. I can say that it is very biblical to enforce the law. That is actually repeated a number of times throughout the Bible. However, this hold on, Jim, if you'll let me finish. Again, I'm not going to comment on the attorney's specific comments that I haven't seen.
It's in the Bible to
That's
follow
not
the
what
law.
I said, and I know it's hard for you to understand. Even short sentences, I guess, but and please don't take my words out of context. But the separation of illegal alien families is the product of the same legal loopholes that Democrats refuse to close. And these laws are the same that have been on the books for over a decade. And the president is simply enforcing them.
Policy to take children away from their parents. Can
It's
you
a
imagine
moral
the horror
policy
that
to
these children
follow
must
and
be going
enforce the
through
law.
when they come across the border?
Jim.
They're with their parents, and then suddenly they're pulled away from their parents. Why is the government doing this?
Because it's the law, and that's what the law states.
Don't you have any empathy?
Jill, go ahead.
Come on, Sarah, you're a parent. Don't you have any empathy for what these people are going through?
Jill.
They have less than
Brian,
you do.
guys,
Sarah, come on,
settle down.
Seriously.
I'm trying to be serious, but I'm not going to have you yell out of turn. Jill, please
It's
call.
a law, and they have, these people have nothing. They
Hey,
come
Brian,
over here
I know
with
you want to get
nothing.
some more TV
It's
time, but that's not what this is about. If I want to recognize you, go ahead,
Sarah.
Jill.
Honestly, answer the question. It's a serious question. These people have nothing. They come to the border with nothing, and you throw children in cages. You're a parent. You're a parent of young children. Don't you have any empathy for what they go through?
Jill, go ahead.
Empathy for children? You make me laugh.
In high school, we recently had a lockdown zone. One thing that affects mine and other students' mental health is the worry about the fact that we or our friends could get shot at school. Specifically, can you tell me what the administration has done and will do to prevent these senseless tragedies?
I think that as a kid and certainly as a parent, there is nothing that could be more terrifying for a kid to go to school and not feel safe. So I'm sorry that you feel that way. This administration takes it seriously.
Oh, but when it's a white kid who's right in front of her, suddenly she's teary-eyed. She's so sad. Oh, you should feel safe in your schools. Wow.
You're a parent of young children. Don't you have any empathy for what they go through?
Jill, go ahead. As a parent, there is nothing that could be more terrifying.
You're a parent of young children. Don't you have any empathy for what they go through?
Jill, go ahead.
I think that contrast of her crying for the first kid and then having total indifference to the brown people crossing the border and anything that happens to their children shows a complete lack of humanism on her behalf. She doesn't care about people who come from different circumstances than her, who look different than her. She only cares about people who are like her. She doesn't give a single fuck at all about children in her country who are trying to escape difficult situations or have been brought there by their parents. She's just like, deal with not having your parents. Deal with not having your family. I don't fucking care. It shows that her moral framework is deeply relativistic. What is important for an American child is not important for a Mexican child. That's her mentality. In case you weren't aware, that part was my opinion. So that's the lay of the land, just in terms of what's been going on. And now I'm going to try to delve somewhat into the minutiae of what the facts are in regards to the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and now the Trump administration, and what the differences are between Obama's policy and Trump's policy, and whether there are differences there or it's just all in people's heads and Obama was just as bad as Trump and everyone's complaining about nothing. I want to try to put the information out there and put it into context. So Trump said that Democrats were to blame for all of this. Now, if we pull everything back and look at what immigration laws are today in America, we will find the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. This law is still in effect, and it is the law which basically governs immigration in America. Now, a very curious fact about this law is that Harry Truman, who was a Democrat, thought this law was inhumane. He tried to veto it, and his veto was overridden by the Congress. His veto message said, "Today we are protecting ourselves as we were in 1924 against being flooded by immigrants from Eastern Europe. This is fantastic. We do not need to be protected against immigrants from these countries. On the contrary, we want to stretch out a helping hand to save those who have managed to flee into Western Europe, to succor those who are brave enough to escape from barbarism, to welcome and restore them against the day when their countries will, as we hope, be free again." These are only a few of the examples of the absurdity, the cruelty of carrying over into this year of 1952 the isolationist limitations of our 1924 law. In no other realm of our national life are we so hampered and stultified by the dead hand of the past as we are in this field of immigration. You go back to the fundamental law that is still in place today, take a look at it, and the Democratic president wanted to veto it. So Trump's statement that the Democrats are at fault for immigration law doesn't make any sense. Now, I know the protest people will have to that quote is that we are talking about crossings from Mexico, not talking about Eastern Europe. I would say that is true, and there's a different context to what the concern is around immigration in this conversation. However, he does say that he thinks America has a role to protect people who are escaping from barbarism. And many of these people crossing the border from Mexico are trying to escape crushing poverty, drugs, gangs. Clearly, Harry Truman trying to veto the law is in that spirit, which completely debunks Trump's claim. In Jeff Sessions' announcement of the zero tolerance policy, he cited a US code. Now, I find the notes on this difficult to read, so I'm not sure exactly when this code first appeared. Potentially 1986? I don't know. But it was amended in the Immigration Act of 1990 and remains in effect today. The code cited by Sessions says, "In proper time or place, avoidance of examination or inspection, misrepresentation and concealment of facts. Any alien who 1. Enters or attempts to enter the United States at any time or place other than is designated by immigration officers, or 2. Eludes examination or inspection by immigration officers, or 3. Attempts to enter or obtains entry to the United States by a willfully false or misleading representation or the willful concealment of a material fact shall, for the first commission of any such offense, be fined under Title 18 or imprisoned not more than 6 months or both, and for a subsequent commission of any such offense be fined under Title 18 or imprisoned not more than 2 years or both." It also says they will be subject to a civil penalty of at least $50 or not more than $250 for each such entry or attempted entry, or twice the amount specified in paragraph 1 in the case of an alien who has been previously subject to a civil penalty under the subsection. Curiously lacking from this code is anything mentioning deportation. It just says that they could get prison time and be fined. It doesn't say what's going to happen to them after that. Jeff Sessions says that the code prohibits both attempted illegal entry and illegal entry into the United States by an alien. It says they can be fined or imprisoned, which I would say disincentivizes. It discourages people from attempting to enter the United States. But it doesn't say anything about you being prohibited or prevented from actually entering the United States. And I just think that's an interesting detail to note, because they talk about the full extent of the law, but in this code cited by Sessions, there isn't even a justification for deporting people. However, there could be an argument to be made that this code allows them to separate children from parents or family or others who are entering with those children, because they can be imprisoned and the children can't go into prison with them, so they have to be put somewhere else. And that's where the Flores agreement comes in. The Flores agreement refers to Jenny Lisette Flores versus Janet Reno, Attorney General of the United States. Jenny Lisette Flores was apprehended by the Immigration and Naturalization Service after attempting to cross the Mexico-United States border. She was taken to a facility where she was held with adults of both sexes, and she was told she was going to be released to her parents, who were suspected illegal immigrants. On July 11, 1985, the Center for Human Rights and Constitutional Law filed a class action lawsuit against U.S. Attorney General Edwin Meese, alleging that the government's detention and release policies were in violation of the children's rights under the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause of the United States Constitution. Now, this case went through the court system until it was finally resolved in 1997, so it took a long time. The Supreme Court ruled on the case in 1993, and judges of both the liberal and conservative disposition agreed 7-2. Unaccompanied alien children had no constitutional right to be released to someone other than a close relative, nor to automatic review by an immigration judge, which I would suspect basically put the whole proceedings on hold, because it just put those children in limbo. They had nowhere to go if they didn't have parents. Eventually, under Bill Clinton in 1997, they came to an agreement called the Flores Agreement, or the Flores Settlement. The agreement basically set how they deal with immigrant children. It wasn't a law in the traditional sense. It was an agreement that basically created a legal framework. And what did it actually do? The key part is Section 6 of the agreement, General Policy Favoring Release. 14. Where the INS determines that the detention of the minor is not required either to secure his or her timely appearance before the INS or the immigration court, or to ensure the minor's safety or that of others, the INS shall release a minor from its custody without unnecessary delay in the following order of preference to A. A parent, which does show that this agreement prioritizes reuniting children with their parents. B. A legal guardian. C. An adult relative. D. An adult individual or entity designated by the parent or legal guardian, blah blah blah. E. A licensed program willing to accept legal custody. Or F. An adult individual or entity seeking custody in the discretion of the INS. When it appears there is no other likely alternative to long-term detention and family reunification does not appear to be a reasonable possibility. But it does have other provisions, such as that a minor may be held by a suitable state or county juvenile detention facility if they are an escape risk, or other things like they've made violent threats, etc. So there's actually provisions in the Flores Agreement to hold minors for a further period of time in different facilities. Trump often talks of the catch and release policy, which he does tie to the Flores Agreement. What this actually refers to is a child who crosses the border with a parent or parents, and that parent or parents are charged with a crime or kept in jail for whatever reason and detained, and then that child needs to go somewhere, so it becomes that the child cannot be held in custody for more than 20 days. According to Vox, ultimately the Ninth Circuit ruled that the Flores settlement covered not just unaccompanied alien children, but accompanied ones as well. It set a general standard that the government couldn't hold them in custody for more than 20 days. The Ninth Circuit stopped short of saying that parents could be released under Flores, but the federal government hasn't responded to Flores by keeping families together for a few weeks and then splitting them apart. Instead, it's made a practice for the most part of releasing the whole family after 20 days, since the current family detention facilities, 2 in Texas created under Obama and an older one in Pennsylvania, are mostly full. They don't have a ton of space to detain families anyway. This is one example of what the Trump administration calls catch and release. So basically it means that in certain circumstances where they don't know what to do with these children, the Flores Agreement applies and gives them a framework within which to try to release those children to the nearest possible person that they could. And if they can't find anybody, they can hold them in a facility. It's in the agreement. So the conditions in which children can be released from facilities to the nearest possible person, and the policy by Democratic leaders to release all of a family together together and then give them a later court date where they are to come back and be tried and sentenced have been dubbed catch and release by the Trump administration. According to NBC News, during the Obama administration, courts intervened in several cases in which families were detained together. The detention of migrants could not be used as an effort to deter asylum seekers, according to one ruling. According to another, the detention of minors with their parents ran afoul of the 1997 Flores settlement, a ruling that set standards for the detention of minors by prioritizing them for release to the custody of their families and requiring those in federal custody to be placed in the least restrictive environment possible. There's a funny end to this article. Just hours before signing that order, however, Trump said his family separation policy paled in comparison to his impression of the images he saw of the Obama-era family detention centers. You look at images from 2014. I was watching this morning and they were showing images from 2014 and they blow away what we're doing today, Trump said. I saw images that were horrible. Pure disingenuousness. Oh, it was bad when Obama did it, but when I do it, like, whatever, fine. Total bullshit. And videos like this attest to how much that's bullshit.
Bueno, aquí tenemos una orquesta. ¿De dónde son ustedes? ¿Y tú? Guatemala. No llores. Vas a llegar con... Mira, ella te va a explicar y te va a ayudar. ¿Cierto, Consul?
¿Qué va a pasar con su consulado hoy?
Papá. Papá. Con mi tía por lo menos para que después llegue.
Nobody is there to provide the love and care that that kid needs. No one cares, and that's happening under Trump's watch. All of this is very confusing and difficult, but I think the one conclusion I could come to from all of this information that we've looked at so far in this video is that there is no particular party to blame for the current issue on the Mexico border. I think it's because it's a very difficult thing which is going to occur. Like, people are going to come across from Mexico. You have to try to figure out how to cope with that, and the Flores agreement or settlement was just one way of them trying to deal with the situation of parents showing up with children. The Flores agreement clearly tried to keep families together, but not at the expense of having children kept in detention with adults. So that's where it made it very difficult, and I think the Democrats often opted for a policy of, okay, these are not like violent criminals, these are not terrible people, they were just trying to cross the border because they want a better life and they're a family. We will allow them to go into the interior and then come back for their court date. Or as Trump would call it, catch and release. It's rather difficult to find information about how many of the people released actually came back for their court case. I don't know how true those figures are. I've seen other figures that put it much lower and say that like only about 13% don't show up for their court case, but I don't really know what is true. Like, no matter what statistic I looked at about that, I guess it's in the range of like 13 to 40% or something. Whatever the case, a certain number of people were escaping into the interior and not showing up for court again. And that's true. I think that's a fact. But I would say the difficulty of that was not any particular democratic law. It was a policy. They made the decision to release them on a certain side of the border, but that brings this whole conversation full circle because we are also talking about a policy on behalf of the Trump administration. We're not talking about a law of any particular kind. The zero tolerance policy was a response to the Democratic policy, which was to release families on the US side of the border pending a court date. I mean, how can you really control something like the US border with Mexico? It seems impossible. And the stupid border wall, I don't think is going to work. I'm very skeptical about that. So what actually was the policy change? According to Jeff Sessions, if you cross the border unlawfully, then we will prosecute you. It's that simple. Now, it's not that the Obama administration was not trying to prosecute people. It's just that they understood that they didn't have the resources to indefinitely detain people. The reason I think that the Obama deportations were so high is because they would do everything they could to try to get an illegal situation where they could deport somebody, even though that meant that people would often fall through the cracks and sort of get through the system. Trump policy of zero tolerance is not centered around deportations at all. It's centered around criminalizing the people who crossed, because they are obsessed with this concept of it's a lawful country with laws. You can't have a country without a law, so we're just going to put aside any sort of common sense or rationality or reasonableness and just say anybody who crosses is a criminal. That is the most important thing to us, because the moment you cross the border, you're a criminal. You are guilty of a crime. I know that a lot of Republicans and conservatives would be saying, of course, yes, of course they are guilty of a crime. But you've got to consider, this is an incredibly large and difficult situation, and just saying that families trying to get across the border for whatever reason, you know, generally trying to find a better life or just get away from where they've come from, are criminals, creates a massive demand on the legal system, and then you require all of these resources of trying to put all of these people in prison and actually punish all of them. And because people are going to keep coming over the border, the need to punish them is never going to end. Like, it's going to be a bottomless chasm of resources. And we know that, like, prison radicalizes people. They don't have a reformist or a restorative justice mentality. They basically, like, turn them into criminals, split up their families, put them in prisons or put them in detainment centers, which will be havens for drugs and crime and radicalization, and completely gum up the legal system, basically causing chaos and a complete mess on the border. And that seems to be what they're going for, because they're so obsessed with this rhetoric of the law. Whereas I think even if you have a lot of issues with deportation, and I do, that is an alternative to criminalization, and I do think criminalization is worse. Now, in response to all of this imagery of him breaking up families and detaining and taking away children, Donald Trump signed an executive order to keep the families together. This executive order said, "It is the policy of this administration to maintain family unity, including by detaining alien families together where appropriate and consistent with law and available resources. It is unfortunate that Congress's failure to act in court orders have put the administration in the position of separating alien families to effectively enforce the law." A lot of people lauded this executive order unthinkingly, without really analyzing what it's actually doing or saying. All that is saying is that where possible, we will detain these families indefinitely together. So I think Donald Trump was like, look, I don't actually care about separating the families or keeping them together. Like, that's not my priorities. Everybody's getting incredibly pissed off and animated because I'm separating these children from their parents. That was just a byproduct of what I'm trying to do, which is to make sure everybody crossing that border is a criminal who gums up the legal system forever. He's basically taking the mentality of the war on drugs, put as many drug offenders or people who do drugs in prison or criminalize them as much as you possibly can, and applying that to immigration. And we all know that the war on drugs has not worked out so well, so the war on illegals is going to just be as counterproductive as that, I think. But he knew that the separation of the families, he doesn't care either way, so it's easy for him to just say, alright, we'll just keep them all together then. We'll just put them in a big family prison. I don't actually give a shit. I just want to make sure that all of them become criminals. People have pointed out that there is no plan or detail or information about reunifying these families. There's nothing like that in the order. Nobody knows how they're actually going to get these families back together, and if the parents are not in America, they're not going to want to come to America to try to get the children. If they are illegal immigrants and they try to get their children, they'll just get detained. The children, well, where are the children supposed to go? The only place that they could possibly go would be if they had legal Mexican relations, and they wouldn't even be able to stay with them because they still came from across the Mexican border. So they're going to have to try to deport these children back to Mexico. That's going to be a messy process. In the meantime, they still won't see their families. So there's no information about how this reunification is going to happen. It basically just says, we're going to make sure where possible to stick the families all in the prison. Okay, I guess that's something. Now, before I get into the final part of this video, I just wanted to talk about the Obama administration, because that is a big thing which has come up from all of this. People talking about whether this is different from Obama, or whether it's the same thing, or whether it's much ado about nothing. And after doing a bunch of research, I have to say on that, it's complicated and it's nuanced. And I don't absolutely know for sure whether the Obama administration made the right decisions. It's just too hard to know that. Now, if you look at this graph, you'll see that in the 1970s through to around the late 90s, there was not that many deportations. And then around 98, it started taking off, and it's just been taking off ever since. Over the course of the Bush administration and the Obama administration, deportations were hitting new highs. Now, I think this breakdown is quite useful because it separates the deportations into non-criminals and criminals. Take that with a grain of salt, because just because someone's listed as a criminal doesn't necessarily mean that they were justifiably convicted. Who knows how fair these court cases are or not, but I'm sure we could assume that the majority or a decent amount of those people were up to something no good. You can see that over the course of George Bush, the criminals stays about the same and the non-criminals goes up. But then when you get to Obama, 2008 to 2013, you can see the criminals are going up, getting closer to parity with the non-criminals. So it's definitely true that Obama was deporting a lot more people who were, at least by the system, found to be criminals. However, there are still a lot of people listed there as non-criminals. According to PolitiFact, in fiscal year 2015, 91% of people removed from inside the US were previously convicted of a crime, which says to me, if you've got a crime and it's on the record, I guess that was just their way of finding you and deporting you. And if you didn't have that record, then it was harder for them to find you. From fiscal years 2009 to 2014, there have been more than 2.4 million removals, according to DHS data. So Obama deported more people than any other president. That's true. But I was sent an interesting article by a Twitter follower, which said that until recent years, most people caught illegally crossing the southern border were simply bussed back to Mexico in what officials called voluntary returns, but which critics derisively termed catch and release. Those removals, which during the 1990s reached more than 1 million a year, were not counted in immigration and custom enforcement's deportation statistics. So the article is saying that they started to count just turnarounds of like sending people back from the border, getting rid of them as quickly as they could to send them back to Mexico as deportations, and those were not being counted as deportations earlier. So part of the massive increase could be down to just a change in how they classified that information. Now, the vast majority of border crossers who are apprehended get fingerprinted and formally deported. The change began during the George W. Bush administration and accelerated under Obama. The policy stemmed in part from a desire to ensure that people who had crossed the country illegally would have formal charges on their records. And as we can see, those formal records are a resource for ICE and immigration officials to keep track of individuals in order to deport them. So if they can get them into the system, then it makes it easier to get rid of them. I also read an interesting article about 2 facilities that Obama built. The article talks about how detainees who have attorneys to represent them are much more likely to come to a favorable situation, and the ones that don't have any representation are very likely to just be deported. As they transported detainees to Karns, Texas, the article notes, the president was delivering a live address on the new protections available to established immigrant families. In an email to notify Artesia volunteers about the transfer, an organizer for AILA named Stephen Manning wrote, "The disconnect from the compassionate-ish words of the president and his crushing policies towards these refugees is shocking." And another part of the article notes, the detainees reported sleeping 8 to a room in violation of the Flores settlement, with little exercise or stimulation for the children. Many were under the age of 6 and had been raised on a diet of tortillas, rice, and chicken bits. In Artesia, the institutional cafeteria food was unfamiliar as the penal atmosphere, and to their parents' horror, many of the children refused to eat. Gaunt kids, mums crying, they're losing hair, up all night. So Obama definitely had facilities where he was housing children in violation of the Flores settlement, and they were in horrible conditions. And there is indeed that photo of children in a cage, which occurred under Obama, not Trump. However, none of that is an excuse for the current zero-tolerance policy of Donald Trump, which is going to exacerbate the situation. It's just taking the bad things Obama did and putting them on crack. That's about it. So people really got to lay off the like, oh, Obama did it thing, because that's not a justification for anything that's occurring now. You could say like, oh, people are being hypocrites because they're not talking about that, but it was people on the left who called him the deporter-in-chief. People like Jorge Ramos, who people often consider to be on the left for whatever reason, who confronted him about that to his face.
As you're saying, you always had the legal authority to stop deportations. Then why did you deport 2 million people?
Jorge, we're not going to...
For 6 years you did it. You destroyed many families.
Jorge,
they call you deporter-in-chief.
You called me deporter-in-chief.
I did Janet Murguia from La Raza.
But let me say this, Jorge.
But you could have stopped deportation.
No.
That's the whole idea.
That is not true. Listen, here's the fact of the matter.
You could have stopped them.
Jorge, here's the fact of the matter. As President of the United States, I'm always responsible for problems that aren't solved right away. I regret millions of people who didn't get health insurance before I passed health insurance and before I implemented it. I regret the fact that there are kids who should have been going to college during my presidency, but because we didn't get to the...
As I've mentioned, I think Trump's policy is completely inhumane. From how he has fomented this rhetoric, I don't think he sees Mexican people as, like, humans, really. He just sees them as, like, foreign creatures who don't have the same hopes and desires for happiness as other people, who are basically just criminals in waiting, who want to come over and colonize his country, bring crime and drugs, and destroy everything. As you can see by the way that when he's talking about immigration, he's constantly bringing up a drug gang called MS-13.
And the Democrats' open border policies have also allowed MS-13 to break into our country and drugs to pour into our streets, and we're stopping it. We have taken out of our country, and actually, can you believe I have to say this, we have liberated towns, liberated, like it was captured by a foreign country. We have liberated towns out in Long Island. MS-13, gangs, we have taken them out of our country by the thousands.
Interesting fact, MS-13 was actually formed in America.
Daniel Denver is with us from Providence, Rhode Island, writer in residence at Harvard Law School's Fair Punishment Project. Last year, he wrote an article for the Washington Post headlined, "Deporting People Made Central America's Gangs. More Deportation Won't Help."
And what his obsessive focus on MS-13 does, aside from scapegoating and facilitating the mass criminalization of Latino immigrants in this country, is obscure the origins and reality of gangs like MS-13. MS-13 was born in Los Angeles amidst the refugees fleeing President Reagan's dirty wars in El Salvador, and became a transnational gang that ultimately did so much to destabilize El Salvador precisely because of deportation policies pursued by President Trump's predecessors. This is a problem that's American-made through and through. So to treat it as though it's some external threat being foisted on Americans, it not only entirely takes out of proportion and exaggerates the criminal threat that MS-13 poses to Americans, it obscures the fact that it's our foreign policies, our military interventions, and our long history that unfortunately well precedes Donald Trump of mass deportations and criminalization of immigrants that created MS-13 in the first place.
Continuously bringing up MS-13 in the same speeches and conversations as he's having about families, people whose lives he is completely tearing apart in his desire to uphold the law, has the effect of basically tying MS-13 to these other Mexican people, where they are actually more like the victims of MS-13 and people are trying to escape that kind of situation, and then tying them together in the conservative id brain. I think it's very clear that politically that's what he's doing. That's kind of like his calculation. Constantly conflate people coming from Mexico with cartels and gangs and drugs and violence, because those things do exist, and less inquiring minds are going to fudge the distinctions between people trying to escape that kind of shit and people who do that kind of shit. And the fact that both of those kinds of people try to cross the border, that's what he's banking on, that they're just going to put them all together like that. The child traffickers and the drug runners, they have to be treated as criminals, and the families who are just trying to cross the border to escape these difficult situations, they have to be treated like criminals, because Mexicans altogether are just some mass of beastliness. That's really all they are to him. I think the outrage about this situation is justified, and that Democrats are not to blame for the specific thing which is occurring now, which is the policy which is specific to Donald Trump, but that they haven't questioned or challenged the philosophy behind immigration and how they treat that in any particular way. Obama was always a massive compromiser, and not just a compromiser, but not very progressive and not very left-wing. He had policies that conservatives should have loved, to be perfectly honest. He was deporting them as much as he possibly could. But it's just with Trump that a kind of vindictiveness and personalized hatred for Mexicans has taken over the policy, and his supporters really celebrate that and love that. But that for a traditional, conservative, Obama was doing everything that they would want, I would think. And just to round it up in terms of my opinion, when I say the philosophy behind the whole situation, I definitely think that families which can be established as close as possible as people just trying to find a better life should not be treated as criminals, even though they have crossed the border. I don't think crossing the border should be a crime. People will say that means that I want open borders, people can come through willy-nilly and do whatever they want. That's not true. I would agree with a regulated border. And by regulated border, I mean that the authorities use their discretion with the people who come through, but determine as a policy that those particular families are not criminals, they are just trying to get away from something or start a better life, and that based on that should be allowed some process to naturalize or become citizens eventually, which could be quite rigorous, and there could be a lot of demands for that, but they'll come out the other end as people who love that country and feel that they've been provided hope and will pay taxes and could potentially be upskilled through various programs to have skills and to have knowledge and expertise that they could help apply to the American economy. And it's like, it's a win-win. It's kind of a no-brainer. But the every Mexican who comes across is a criminal approach destroys the possibility of that and will just lead to prisons as far as the eye can see. And I think it's a recipe for an extreme amount of disaster and human misery and suffering, which we're just seeing at its inception now. So who knows where it's really going to lead. But there's already been plenty of misery in the area of immigration. Under Bush and Obama and Trump, he's just saying, time to go next level. I understand that the desire to make sure that everything is treated as an affront to the law in terms of a border makes somebody feel good, and it makes them feel like they are achieving something, like it's a principle. You know, it's a powerful principle of justice and retribution. But I think that when you are punishing a crime which does not come with any evil intent, that only produces social, economic, and crime-related problems, that in that kind of situation you have to compromise and use common sense and logic. I can at least say that Obama and even Bush were trying to think in logical ways of trying to deal with the immigration situation. But Trump is not doing that. And I would say my takeaway from all of that is the philosophy on immigration in America is unjust. It doesn't consider that there could be an opportunity there to get more human capital in their country. Because if it's something that a country's settled with, it's going to have to find a way to make the best out of it. And I would say that the immigration policy up to this point in that country has been characterized by basically scrambling around with their heads off trying to find anything that they could do. And that's changed now because there's a very clear direction, and it's an extremely nativist and, dare I say it, no, I'm not going to say the R word in this video. It rhymes with acism. I'm not going to say the R acism word because I don't want to cause offense. I think I'll just leave it there. It's a very difficult and complicated subject of which I am not an expert, and I'm looking forward to the many geniuses in the comments telling me where I went wrong or helping to enlighten me further. Thank you very much.